Robert Chestnut.
Joseph Chapman.
Jesse Leach.
John McVeigh.
Ellen Thornley.
Jack Leonard.
Carl Bonsamel.
Lillian Clark.
Charlie Allen.
Mr. Middleton. Excuse me. Mr. Middleton?
Yes?
Henry McGuire, Calgary Daily Herald.
Pleased to meet you, Mr. McGuire.
Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?
Sure, but why me?
Well, I'm talking to a number of people in town, and I'm hoping that you can help me sort out some of the rumors that are circulating. I understand you knew some of the victims.
And survivors, too. You meet a lot of people in my line of work.
Yes. Your photograph of the landslide, it had a lot of impact on our readers. It's even more amazing seeing the full extent of the damage in person. It makes me wonder why you choose to stay.
People said Frank would be the new Pittsburgh. Many of us still believe it.
At the turn of the 20th century, people throughout the Crow's Nest Pass had every reason to be optimistic about the future. Coal had been discovered in the pass in the mid-1800s. In 1898, the Canadian Pacific Railway constructed a rail line through, and the boom was on. People came from the world over to work in the underground coal mines. Towns sprang up almost overnight. Frank was no exception. When coal was discovered at the base of Turtle Mountain in 1900, entrepreneurs Henry Frank and Samuel Gibault established the Canadian-American Coal and Coke Company and started building the town they named in honor of Mr. Frank. Mining operations started in 1901, and by 1903, the mine was in full production. And Frank had businesses, hotels, churches, a school, and a population of 600. To accommodate miners and their families, Frank and Gibault had houses built for the married workers along the shores of Gold Creek, and a boarding house for single men nearby.
Who would have thought Frank would be such an exciting place? So full of opportunity for someone like me just starting out. I've got a job as a photographer's apprentice, though it's not without its challenges. I'm learning to take pictures early in the day, before the sun goes behind the mountain. Living in the mountain shadow doesn't bother me, though. I'm happy to be living here. Frank is full of excitement, interesting characters, plenty of work.
Among those who lived in the miners' houses were Alfred and Millie Clark and family. Alfred worked night shifts in the mine. eldest daughter Lillian had a job at the single men's boarding house.
The new manager of the boarding house runs the place proper. So Mama said I could sleep here if I worked late. It's better than walking home. Mama says the town's a little too wild. It's no place for a girl on her own late at night.
Alexander Leach ran the local mercantile store in Frank. He, his wife Rosemary, 4 sons and 3 daughters also lived in a miner's house a few doors from the Clarks. Alex Leach's next-door neighbor was Karl Bansimer, a German immigrant who worked in the mine but was building a homestead east of the pass at Lundbreck. Another resident of the Gold Creek homes was mine worker Sam Ennis. His wife Lucy and their children, James Arthur, Delbert, Hazel, and little Gladys, plus Lucy's brother Jim Warrington. Next door lived John Watkins, another mine worker, and his family. Also located near Gold Creek were livery stables, a shoe shop, a number of temporary dwellings, and up the valley, a railway construction camp, and 2 ranches, including James Graham's homestead. And Turtle Mountain presided over it all. Despite the town's lively nature, the looming mountain did make some people feel uncomfortable. Oral histories of the Blackfoot and Kootenay of the Crow's Nest region passed down a fear of Turtle Mountain from generation to generation. Native peoples traveling the valley refused to camp at the mountain's base. Something about the mountain made them nervous. They called it the mountain that moves. But the residents of Frank had no knowledge of the mountain's unstable structure, and few were likely to have taken much stock in native legends. Unknown to them, in the cold early morning hours of April 29, 1903, the precarious balance was tipping.
You're one of the lucky ones, Mr. Middleton. You're still here. Have you ever thought about why you survived and the others didn't?
Well, I've thought about it all right. Fate, maybe? Choices? I'm not sure. You live a normal life. You go about your daily routines. You never know what tomorrow might bring. But no one could have known how the decisions they made that day would forever affect their lives.
Ned Morgan was at the Graham Ranch, down by the Crow's Nest River that afternoon.
I left my horses in town while I went to sell some cattle to James. Graham's invited me to stay for the night, but I don't like leaving my good horses alone. You never know what mischief those miners get up to after the bars close down.
The Chestnut brothers were new in town. Had only been here a week or so.
Charlie and me, we got jobs at the mine, but the town's so full there's no place to stay. We were supposed to move into Jack Dawes' cabin by Gold Creek today, but his train reservations got snarled up. For now, we have to sleep at the Union Hotel, and it's eaten up our wages. Besides, I'm getting tired of my brother's tomfoolery.
And John Thornley ran the shoe shop near the miners' homes. His sister Ellen was visiting from out of town.
After John closed up shop for the night, we decided to stay at a hotel in town. He thought it might give me a jump on catching the train for home in the morning. Just like John, always planning ahead.
John McVeigh was manager of the construction crew building a rail line from Frank to the town of Lille.
Got the Breckenridge and Lund crew of 60 men coming in tonight. Sent my stable boss Jack Leonard to Pincher Creek for a load of hay. Well, no point going back to Blairmore with the wife away in Calgary. Might just as well stay here in camp. Haven't seen the men in a while. Gonna be nice to catch up on the news.
The mine's night shift started work at midnight, hauling coal out to the tipple, checking and replacing timbers. Joe Chapman was night shift foreman.
It was about 4 in the morning. I was checking timbers with Charlie Alec. Alfred and Fred had a load ready to haul out. They wanted to take their lunch break while they were at the weigh scale with Alex. That was fine by me.
A freight train crew was working in the mine yard. There were 2 brakemen that night, Sid Choquette and Bill Lowes. Ben Murgatroyd was the engineer.
That fancy passenger train, the Spokane Flyer, was late again. She had to go by before we could get the loaded coal cars up to the main line. I hated to be dawdling there. I don't know what it was about that place. Always put me on edge. But since we had to wait, we made ourselves useful. Dropped an empty car at the tipple.
Aside from these few at the mine, most of the townsfolk were sound asleep, including me.
Just as I was moving ahead, I heard something above us in the dark. Couldn't tell what it was, but it scared me, so I yelled at the boys to swing up. Like a nightmare come true. We were going as fast as we could, with Bill and Sid holding on for dear life. I looked back, thought I saw men at the weigh scale come out and start running, but suddenly they were gone. Then falling rock took out the bridge that we'd just crossed.
John and I were at the Frank Hotel. The whole building shook.
I sat bolt upright and said to Charlie, "Gosh, that's a long freight going by." And he said, "That's not a freight."
There was a woman in the street with her child, and they were shivering and distraught. So I gave her my coat. It was so cold. She ran off into the night.
Down in the mine we felt a bump. Now that's not unusual, but this time was different. Shook the place up good, it did. The tunnel entrance was blocked. But there were 17 of us alive, and thankful for that. The only one hurt was Bill Warrington, twisted an ankle in the confusion.
There was so much dust, all around us. Then we remembered the Spokane Flyer was coming through. Bill and Sid took off to flag down the train. I wondered if I'd ever see them again.
I sent Dan Mackenzie to the lower entrance to see if we could get out that way. Meanwhile, I set the boys to digging. Although I reckon there was maybe 300 feet of rock and timber between us and the outside.
Bill and I ran as best we could in the dark and all that dust. We could still hear rock falling above us. Bill could not go on, but he says to me, "Keep going, Sid. Stop the train."
At 4:10 a.m. on April 29, 1903, 90 million tons of limestone cracked away from the east face of Turtle Mountain and roared down the mountainside. Within seconds, the slide reached the Crow's Nest River, scooping up mud from the riverbed and slamming it into the southeast part of town, damming Gold Creek and swallowing the nearby dwellings. The rock avalanche raced across the valley, stopping 100 seconds later when it reached the opposite slope. The slide generated a thick cloud of rock dust so charged with electricity, it created its own lightning.
As dawn broke, what little we could see was still smothered in dust. We started looking for survivors.
What the residents of Frank found was unimaginable. The slide had buried everything in the vicinity of Gold Creek, as well as the construction camp, 2 ranches, the livery stables, and the surface workings of the Frank mine. More than a mile of the CPR main line lay under the rubble, along with some 2 miles of the partially constructed spur line that led to the town of Lille. Of Frank's 600 residents, about 100 had been in the slide's path.
Carl Bansimer's house was pushed off its foundation but stayed standing. Inside, Annie Bansimer and 7 children all survived. Luckily, Carl and his 2 oldest sons were away at their homestead. The Ennis family survived too, although their home was destroyed. Lying with a broken collarbone in the rubble of her home, Lucy Ennis groped through the debris, searching for her baby, Gladys. Incredibly, she managed to save her little daughter, who was suffocating on mud.
Lucy's brother, Jim Warrington, was thrown clear of the house and broke his hip. When they were pulling him from the wreckage, he said he could feel something underneath him. They kept digging and found his neighbor, Mrs. Watkins. She had puncture wounds and rock fragments embedded in her skin. She was still breathing. Her children, Ruby and Thomas, were unhurt. But her baby, Fernie Mae, was missing.
Edgar Ashe found her nearby, crying, but unharmed.
But little Fernie's father, John Watkins, was still inside the mine along with the other night shift workers.
Dan came back with the bad news. The lower entrance was flooded, and the air shafts were closed off too. We had to keep digging, but we were running out of time. We knew the methane would start to build up before long, and one spark from our picks could set off an explosion. I could see the worry eating at young Charlie.
Things were desperate. I was discouraged. We weren't getting anywhere. So much rock, the timbers all crushed, air was bad. Some of the boys were scared. Then Joe figures it out. The coal, the top of the seam runs close to the surface. He says, "Boys, we can mine our way out of here, through the coal."
Joe Chapman hit upon a singular plan to escape from the mine. The men could take advantage of the vertical coal seam by working their way up to the surface.
The going was slow. We could only dig two at a time in the narrow space. We all took turns. We were mining for our lives.
What was going through your mind that morning?
All that mud. Trees uprooted. Houses smashed. Alexander Leach, his wife Rosemary, and their 4 sons were sleeping on the lower level of their home when it was buried in rock and mud. The upper floor collapsed into a pile of rubble and broken furniture. The 2 daughters, Jessie and May, were pinned beneath roof beams in the iron frame of their bedstead. It saved their lives. Even more incredible, baby Marion was thrown out a window by the force of the impact. She was found outside later, unhurt.
We dug for hours when we finally got through the coal seam and into the rock. We knew we were close to breaking out of that tomb of a mine. Then Evan Jones shouted down that Dan Mackenzie had made it through. We were truly glad to feel that fresh air. When we got out, we couldn't believe our eyes. Nothing but rock and boulders, mud and broken trees where some of our homes used to be. Gone, all gone. The only living thing we could see was the rescue team, digging for us down at the mine entrance.
Later that afternoon, I went back to the studio. All of a sudden, people in town started yelling and running down the road. The miners we thought were dead were walking back into town. It was 5 in the afternoon. The men had been underground since midnight. One look at their blackened, exhausted faces, and I knew these men cared only about finding their families. John Watkins learned that his family had survived, including baby Fernie Mae. Charlie Ellick, Evan Jones, Joe Chapman, and Dan McKenzie all lived in other parts of Frank. Their families were spared. But for Bill Warrington, the news was heartbreaking.
My wife worried every time I went underground, but she's the one who died. Gone. My whole family. None of them found.
The miners were lucky to be alive, as were many others.
We were supposed to move to McVeigh's construction camp. We were waiting on a blindsiding when the train went right on by. We thought it was pretty bad luck, until we made it into Frank a day late and helped them dig out after the slide. They could have been digging us out.
Had we not decided to spend the night at the hotel, we would have been buried alive in John's shoe shop.
The slide completely covered the Graham Ranch. If I'd stayed there instead of getting back to my horses in town, I'd have been killed along with James and his family.
I usually stayed in camp. John went home to Blairmore, but he sent me to Pincher Creek for a load of hay that afternoon. His wife was away, so he stayed in camp that night. That could have been me killed.
If it wasn't for Jack Dawes' botched reservations, Charlie and me would be dead. Instead of Jack and his 2 friends from Wales.
It was the first time in my life I ever slept away from home. I didn't know until morning that my house was gone, my family killed. Even my dad. He wasn't in the mine. He was at the weigh scale.
As it turned out, the Frank mine was a pretty safe place to be. The only mine workers killed that night were Fred Farrington, Alfred Clark, and Alexander Tashigan. All 3 were taking a lunch break outside the mine at the weigh scale, and all 3 would have been within eyesight of the freight train working in the mine yard below. In the days that followed, people speculated about the cause of the slide. Most assumed a mine explosion or earthquake had triggered it. Within days of the disaster, the federal government sent 2 geologists, Richard McConnell and Reginald Brock, to investigate. They were the first to examine the geology and structure of Turtle Mountain. Their findings quickly dispelled rumors that a mine explosion caused the slide. Instead, they found numerous contributing factors.
The chief of these were the structure and condition of the mountain, aided by exceptional atmospheric and other natural conditions. Also, possibly, by slight readjustments in the lower strata, attendant on mining operations. Reginald Brock.
The final cause of the slide, the snapping of the last thread supporting the peak, which broke away, was in all probability due to the temperature conditions during and preceding the morning of April 29th. Richard McConnell.
Their work also revealed for the first time the mountain's unstable geological structure. $60 to 70 million years ago, tectonic forces caused crustal plates to collide, pushing up the Rocky Mountains. In the Crow's Nest area, rock layers buckled, broke, and moved. Some of the older limestones eventually came to rest over much younger coal-bearing rock. Coal seams contorted into a near vertical position. At the same time, the limestone beds that formed Turtle Mountain were folded into an A-frame shape. As a result, the layers on the east side of the mountain sloped steeply, like slippery playing cards, stacked one atop another. Over time, erosion began to destroy the mountain, breaking down its surface and eating away at its core. Glacial ice carved off much of Turtle Mountain's eastern face, and when the ice melted, the Crow's Nest River continued to erode the mountain at its weakest point. Then miners drove a tunnel along the coal seam, further weakening what was already a dangerous situation. The mountain was barely holding its own against the combined forces of gravity, water, ice, and mining. Heavy snowfall in March 1903 was followed in April by warm temperatures. The snowpack on Turtle Mountain began to melt, and water ran into the extensive network of fissures along the summit. Then, in the early morning of April 29th, the temperature plummeted. Meltwater inside the cracks froze and pried apart the rock layers within the mountain. This was the last straw that tipped the precarious balance and brought the mountain crashing down. The slide was over in less than 100 seconds. But a haunting question still remains. How could so much rock travel so far, so fast? Slide debris covers more than a square mile of the valley floor. Boulders the size of houses lie more than a mile from the mountain's face. And some of the slide's features suggest that very unusual and powerful forces came into play during those fateful and fleeting seconds. Some researchers believe a projecting ledge briefly launched some of the falling rock into the air. This theory could account for the lack of boulders along the base of the mountain. Most of the slide appears to have been deflected over the river, but not all of it. At least some of the cascading debris scooped up water, soil, and vegetation from the river, and like a tidal wave, slammed it into the miners' houses. There have been many theories about the slide's rapid movement, but most researchers now believe the main mass of the slide flowed like a liquid. Like water, the slide flowed around obstacles such as hills and ridges, following the ground's contours before coming to a stop on the opposite side of the valley. The slide debris blanketed the land. In some areas, debris is nearly 100 feet in depth, and in others, the pre-slide surface has barely been covered. These two pieces of steel rail from the old CPR line lie intact at the outer edge of the slide. Carried in the mass of flowing rock, it was a violent ride judging from the rail's mangled edges. The sea of rubble forever changed the character of the valley. People were now wary of Turtle Mountain. But in a boomtown, even one hit by a disaster, there is a push to rebuild.
The day after the slide, Frank was evacuated. Most people went west to Blairmore.
Do you think many will return now that the evacuation order's been lifted?
Some will, but some are still afraid.
Do you still think it fortunate to live in Frank, Mr. Middleton?
I'm just happy to be alive, Mr. McGuire. Anywhere.
The railway line was reconstructed within 3 weeks. The mine reopened soon after. That's when mine workers made a startling discovery. Just inside the entrance, they found Charlie, a workhorse who was abandoned in the mine when the workers escaped. For almost a month, Charlie survived by drinking from a pool of water. He ate wood from the mine's timbers. He even sucked on his harness for salt. When the miners found him, he was barely alive. Well-meaning, they fed Charlie a treat of oats and brandy, but the brave horse was too weak. He died in the company of those he had served so well. Eight years passed, and then in 1911, the federal government declared the area unsafe. Buildings under Turtle Mountain's North Peak were moved. There's not much left of the old town today. Basement depressions where the buildings of Dominion Avenue once stood and an old fire hydrant are all that remain of this once vibrant community. Pilings are all that is left of the rebuilt railway bridge that once led to the busy entrance of the Frank mine. The mine continued production until 1917 and closed the following year. Scattered equipment lies in ruin at the mine entrance. Sentinels of a bygone era when coal was king in the Crow's Nest Pass. The tale of Frank is part of the age-old story, man versus nature. It's a tale of people exploiting a resource and building without a full understanding of the dangers and risks involved. A sad tale of tragedy and loss. But there were heroes too. Sid Choquette ran more than 1.5 miles in pitch darkness over rock and rubble and flagged down the Spokane Flyer. For saving the lives of the passengers and crew, the CPR rewarded him with a letter of commendation and $25, a handsome sum in those days. Of the 100 people in the slide's path, at least 70 were killed. The deadliest rock slide in North America. Fewer than 20 bodies were ever recovered. Most of the 23 known survivors moved away from Frank. Alexander Leach's 3 surviving daughters, Jessie, May, and Marion, were raised by relatives. The Ennis family went to Blairmore. They lived in a tent while they built their new home. Though Sam Ennis continued to work at the mine, the family never moved back to Frank. Lillian Clark, sole survivor of the Clark family, left Frank to live with her uncle's family in the state of Washington. Charlie Ellick went back to work in the Frank mine. Then later, still under the shadow of Turtle Mountain, he took a job at Hillcrest. Ironically, 11 years later, he died there. One of 189 victims of Canada's worst mine disaster. And as for Henry Frank, it is said that he never recovered from the shock of the devastating landslide. He died in Butte, Montana in 1908. For months he had been confined to a private sanatorium, his mind broken by memories of his ill-fated mining venture. Life went on as normal in the Crow's Nest Pass. People continued to move into the area. In 1922, a crew grading the road across the slide debris found the smashed ruins of a miner's house, and inside, the skeletal remains of its occupants. Whose? Clark's? Warrington's? We'll never know. A memorial was placed where the house was found. Coal once brought hundreds of people to Frank and the entire Crow's Nest Valley. Today, people are attracted to the area for other reasons. The heritage of the pass has been discovered. Wind energy is being harnessed. And the Crow's Nest River is one of North America's premier trout streams. But some things haven't changed. The Canadian Pacific Railway still runs through here. The area is still home to the people of the Crow's Nest Pass. Turtle Mountain still watches over it all. And like the community at its feet, the mountain is dynamic and ever-changing. Gravity and time, water and ice, continue to eat away at the rock. Rock still tumbles from Turtle Mountain. Only a week after these pictures were filmed, a large spire collapsed, sending thousands of tons of rock cascading down the mountain face, creating a white scar. The scar will fade with time, but others will appear, reminding us of the ever-changing and dynamic nature of Turtle Mountain. The South Peak, however, is the area of greatest concern. It increasingly exhibits the same signs of instability as the wedge of limestone that came away from the mountain's face in 1903. We don't know when. We only know the mountain that moves will move again.